Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought the old Victorian house on the edge of Maple Grove, I expected creaky floors and quiet nights, not a war with the HOA queen, a buried secret in the basement, and a mystery that tied my home to a crime no one dared to solve. Some houses don't want to be forgotten. I moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of Maple Grove 2 years ago. And from the moment I stepped out of the U-Haul, I knew I'd made the right choice, and that I'd made enemies. The house had stood there since the early 1920s, tall and brooding with its steep gables and wraparound porch, like it had witnessed 100 years of neighborhood nonsense and was just waiting for someone quiet enough to appreciate it. That someone was me, Logan Brooks, 45 years old, writer of detective fiction, connoisseur of solitude, sworn enemy of suburban small talk. I'd barely started unloading boxes when she appeared. She walked up the front path like she owned it, a stiff little woman in a salmon-colored blouse, hair set like concrete, smile stretched tight across her face. She didn't introduce herself right away. First, she looked the place up and down with visible disapproval, like I'd just parked a garbage truck in front of the Louvre. Then finally, Glenda Marshall, president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. I offered a hand. She didn't take it. "Just wanted to personally welcome you," she said, eyes flicking to the rusted iron fence around my yard. "Though I must say, this property is quite the departure from the architectural integrity of the neighborhood." I didn't blink. "Thanks. Bought it for that reason." Her eyes narrowed. "The fence," she continued undeterred, "doesn't meet HOA standards. And that oak tree in your yard, it looks dangerous. Likely needs to be removed before it drops a limb on someone's Prius." I gave a small nod, half amused. "Well, good news. This house isn't part of the HOA. Was built long before this place was a grove of anything but raccoons and moss." That was the first time she said it. That line I'd hear again in various forms. We'll see about that. Over the next several months, the war came slowly, passively, like poison slipped in tea. I received my first official letter from the HOA within the week. Alleged violations, mismatched exterior color palette, non-standard mailbox, and visual disharmony with adjacent properties. It went straight in the trash. Then came the second, and the third. By month 6, I'd racked up over a dozen letters. They got increasingly specific and absurd. One cited the unsightly nature of exposed brick. Another claimed that my antique porch lamp posed a thematic conflict with modern neighborhood lighting design. That one almost made me laugh. Then it wasn't funny. She tried to petition the local zoning board to have my property annexed into Maple Grove's jurisdiction. 3 times. All failed. Turns out legal boundaries are harder to manipulate than a neighborhood bake sale. But it showed me she wasn't just annoying. She was obsessed. I started getting looks from neighbors. The kind that last a second too long. The kind that silently ask, "You hiding bodies in that cellar, writer man?" Rumors were floating. That I was a recluse. That I worked with disturbing materials. That I might be on something. One brave soul even asked me if I was really writing books or just saying that while watching people. Funny thing is, I was writing. My basement workspace had become a kind of bunker, lined with books, stacked with research, littered with coffee mugs and discarded drafts. In that quiet, musty space beneath the house, I was halfway through a manuscript that would later become a bestseller, but upstairs, war was brewing. I tried ignoring it. I didn't file complaints, didn't respond to letters. I thought, if I starve the fire of oxygen, maybe it'll burn itself out. But with people like Glenda Marshall, oxygen isn't the fuel. Power is. Control is. And what drove her nuts, what made her genuinely dangerous, was the fact that she couldn't control me, couldn't even touch me legally. I was a loophole in her perfect little empire. So she tried something else. Little things started happening. HOA drones with clipboards parked across the street, pretending to check curb alignments. A guy with a camera came by to photograph unique landscaping for the HOA newsletter. I caught another woman peeking over my fence, whispering into a Bluetooth headset. I waved. She ran. I installed cameras, 4, then 6. All discreet, all motion sensitive. If someone was going to snoop around my property, I'd know. I started saving the HOA letters, scanning them, archiving every scrap of paper and every attempt at friendly outreach. If this went legal, and it smelled like it might, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. And through all this, Glenda smiled. She waved when she passed my house. She left tiny cards with her picture on them, working for a better Maple Grove. I never once saw her without her clipboard or her faux concerned tone, but behind her eyes, I saw it. That boiling, brittle kind of rage you only find in people who've never been told no. She wanted me out. She wanted the house gone, absorbed, neutered. And every day that I quietly sat there, sipping my coffee, reading old mysteries, and not giving in to her psychological HOA waterboarding, was a day she got a little closer to snapping. I didn't know it yet, but she was already planning something. And it wasn't just about mailboxes and paint colors anymore. It was about history and revenge. It started with whispers, not the metaphorical kind. Literal whispers between neighbors on their driveways during dog walks behind car doors that hadn't quite shut yet. I noticed it first when Susan from across the street, who normally waved at me while pruning her hydrangeas, began ducking behind her SUV when I stepped outside to get the mail. Then there was Carl, who used to jog past my house every morning. Suddenly he was taking the long route down Magnolia Avenue. Something was off. Again. The confirmation came on a Saturday morning when my neighbor Bill, the only one in this HOA-ridden suburb with a functioning conscience, stopped me as I was wheeling my trash can to the curb. "Hey, Logan," he said, lowering his voice like we were discussing a criminal enterprise. "Look, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Glenda's been talking again." I blinked, and here I was thinking she finally got laryngitis. Bill didn't laugh. That worried me. "She's saying you were at her house the day her grandmother's brooch disappeared." I froze. "Come again?" "Yeah, says it's a family heirloom. Real old, platinum, emeralds, worth at least $15,000. Says she had it out during some garage sale last month, and after that, it vanished. She thinks I stole it. She's saying you were lurking near her property that afternoon. I told her that didn't sound like you, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "You know how people are." That was putting it mildly. In reality, I hadn't even been in town that day. I'd been in Portland for a meeting with my editor. I had receipts, email timestamps, even a damn parking ticket from downtown. But none of that would matter once the suburban gossip engine got going. You couldn't outpace a rumor on foot. It was already in people's heads. And the kicker, there hadn't even been a garage sale. Not one I saw. I checked my surveillance footage from the supposed date. Nothing. No tents, no tables, no crowds. Just Glenda mowing her front lawn like a Stepford Sentinel. I could have let it go. But something about this felt off script for her. She was usually more subtle. Petty violations, bureaucratic maneuvering, psychological warfare. But this was escalation. This was character assassination with malicious intent. That night, I dug deeper. I started pulling the files I had saved about Glenda. Yes, I'd started one. Call it habit. Writers are hoarders of details. Photos from HOA pamphlets, public meeting minutes, a few quotes she'd given the local paper. I wanted to know why she was so obsessed with my house, and then I found it. An article from 23 years ago. Local paper, headline, "Private Investigator Walter Marshall retires after 2 decades of service. Husband of Glenda Marshall. Deceased now, of course. Died of a stroke according to the obituary. He'd been a well-respected PI in town. Helped with insurance fraud, civil disputes, missing persons. But what really caught my eye was one line near the end. Marshall declined to comment on his final open case, which sources say involved a long unsolved disappearance tied to a historic property on the outskirts of Maple Grove. I read that line 5 times. Outskirts of Maple Grove. I went to my basement, pushed aside boxes, found the old deed to my house, the one I'd had scanned and notarized after Glenda's first attempt to absorb my property into her authoritarian HOA fantasy. There it was. Lot number, parcel ID, date of construction 1921, and a small handwritten note in the margin of the deed left by the previous owner, a man named Donald Wexler. History in the floorboards. Ask Marshall. I stared at it until my coffee went cold. Later that night, an email arrived in my inbox. No subject line, no signature, just a scan of an old document. Case report. Typed, dated, slightly blurry but readable. The name at the top, Walter Marshall Investigations. Subject, B case. Notes, possible evidence may still be located on property. Recommend further inspection. Basement area. No explanation, no indication who sent it. But someone out there thought I needed to know what Glenda was after. And it wasn't just about a brooch. it was about something else. Something her husband had never finished. Something she now believed was buried, perhaps literally, inside my home. That night, I double-locked every door and window. It was a Wednesday, somewhere around 3 in the afternoon. One of those rare Oregon afternoons when the sky forgets how to rain and remembers how to glow. I had just come back from the grocery store. Nothing dramatic, just eggs, coffee, and a box of Pop-Tarts I wasn't proud of. I remember it clearly because it was the last normal moment before things got weird. When I stepped into the house, something felt wrong. You know how sometimes you walk into a room and can just tell someone's been there? It wasn't a noise. It was the stillness. Like the air itself had gone stiff. The front door was locked, exactly how I left it. No windows were open, alarm system hadn't gone off, but I had this cold feeling in my ribs, like my body knew something my brain hadn't caught up with yet. And then I heard it. A faint sound, like paper rustling, from beneath the floor. The basement. I set the grocery bag down slowly, quietly. Didn't call out, just moved toward the basement door, listening. The steps creaked under my feet as I descended, heart pounding harder with each one. What I saw stopped me cold. There, in the middle of the basement, my basement, was Glenda Marshall. Dressed in her usual pastel cardigan and pearls like she was heading to Sunday brunch, hunched over one of my cardboard boxes like a raccoon in church. She had pulled out stacks of papers, my manuscripts, notes, even old journals, and was flipping through them like she was cataloging evidence. Next to her, the box of rare books. My collection, some of them nearly a century old, had been opened. Gloves on her hands, her handbag beside her, unzipped and waiting. "Are you kidding me?" I said. She gasped, turned, then immediately composed herself. "Oh, Logan, thank God it's you. I thought there was a burglar." The door was open and I heard something downstairs and "You heard something from inside my locked house." "Well, the lock might not have been secure." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You picked it." Her eyes narrowed, but she tried to play innocent. "I was looking for my grandmother's brooch. I knew you had something to do with it, and I was right. Look at all this." She gestured at the mess like I'd just confessed with my belongings. "You think I stole a brooch, broke into my own basement, and hid it between a first edition Chandler and my notes for a murder mystery? You're hiding something. This whole house is hiding something. Don't play dumb with me." It wasn't just delusion, it was obsession. Her eyes weren't focused. She wasn't just looking for jewelry anymore. She was digging for meaning, for closure, maybe even revenge. "Get out," I said. "Now. I'm not leaving until I find what you're hiding." That was when I made my decision. No yelling, no threats, just quiet resolve. I turned and walked upstairs. "Logan," she called after me. "Logan, I'm warning you." I closed the basement door behind me and slid the thick iron bolt into place. The door was original, solid oak, installed sometime around 1921. The bolt was newer, but just as unforgiving. When it clicked into the frame, it made a sound that echoed louder than any scream she could muster. There was a beat of silence. Then the banging began. "Let me out. This is unlawful imprisonment. I'll sue you. I'll have your property condemned. You're finished. You hear me?" I stood there for a moment, listening to her panic rise. Then I walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded confused at first. "You have an intruder locked in your basement." "Yes." "Are they armed?" "Only with delusions of grandeur." I explained the situation calmly. Someone had broken into my house. I had contained them without violence, and I was requesting law enforcement. They assured me someone would be dispatched immediately. Glenda continued to rage from below. She screamed, cursed, threatened. At one point she sobbed dramatically, claiming she couldn't breathe. Then she started demanding water. I ignored her. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the live feed from the camera above my front door. 20 minutes in, a patrol car appeared, then another. I walked to the basement door and said through the wood, "You're about to have company. I suggest you start rehearsing your apology." She screamed something incoherent. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked calmly to the front door, opened it, and greeted the sheriff like an old friend. Sheriff Douglas looked like the kind of man who preferred a fishing pole to a pistol. Broad shoulders, thinning hair, khakis that hadn't been ironed since the Bush administration. When he stepped out of the cruiser, he gave me a nod like we were meeting for coffee, not dealing with a self-declared hostage situation. "Mr. Brooks," he said, adjusting his belt. "You've got quite the story for me today. "You have no idea," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. Behind him came Deputy Harris, younger, quieter, eyes scanning everything like it might explode. I led them to the basement door. "She's in there?" Douglas asked. "Still shouting," I said, "though she's moved on from threats to promising legal apocalypse." He nodded once, then rapped on the oak with his knuckles. "Mrs. Marshall, it's Sheriff Douglas." I'm opening the door. From inside, an operatic scream. "Arrest him immediately. He imprisoned me. He's dangerous. I've been held against my will." Douglas sighed. "Stand back." I unbolted the door. It creaked open like a scene out of a Victorian ghost story. And then she was there, wild-eyed, disheveled, hair askew like she'd fought a poltergeist, and lost. She pushed past me, straight into the sheriff's face. "I demand you arrest this man." He locked me in a basement, like some kind of twisted lunatic. I came to talk about the brooch, and he locked me in a dungeon. Douglas held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Let's back up. What exactly were you doing in his basement?" "I was investigating," she shrieked. "He stole my heirloom. I had every reason to suspect." "You had a warrant?" he asked. She blinked. "A key? Permission to enter?" His door was unlocked. "No, it wasn't," I cut in. "I lock it every time I leave. And I have proof." I pulled out my phone and opened the app for my front door camera. A clear video, Glenda approaching, looking around, then producing a slim black tool from her bag. She worked the lock for nearly 5 minutes before slipping inside. I watched her expression change as she realized what was coming. There's a moment in every bad liar's life when the wheels come off, when denial turns into a desperate calculation. She stood there, lips trembling, eyes flicking between us. That doesn't prove anything," she muttered. Maybe I found the key. I could have found it." "In your bag?" I said. "Right next to your burglary kit." Douglas turned to Harris. "Get a bag ready. We're going to need a statement. And gloves." That should have been the end of it. But Glenda wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. As Harris stepped outside to radio in, Glenda leaned in, voice lower, venomous. "You'll regret this, Sheriff. You think you're untouchable?" Douglas raised an eyebrow. "You threatening me?" She smiled sweetly. Too sweetly. "Just reminding you who supported your last campaign, and who knows people in the mayor's office." Douglas stared at her for a long, hard moment. "Ma'am, if you think political pressure is going to help your case, you're more deluded than I thought." She turned bright red. "I will be speaking to your superiors." He stepped back, stone-faced. "By all means. But first, you're going to answer some questions, and you're not going to interrupt me again, or I'll add obstruction to your list." Glenda went quiet, but her eyes kept burning holes through the room. Back on the porch, Harris gave Douglas a look. "Dispatch says she's been making noise all over town about that brooch. Might be worth talking to the insurance company, see if a claim's already been filed." "Good idea," Douglas said. Then, to me, "We're going to have to process this formally, Mr. Brooks. Can I get a quick walkthrough of what she touched?" I nodded and led them down. The basement was a mess. My notes were in disarray, manuscripts scattered. One of the boxes with my rare books had clearly been rifled through, bindings bent, sleeves crumpled, my gut clenched. Douglas turned on a flashlight and scanned the room. "Anything missing?" "I'm not sure yet, but I'll make a list." He knelt near the open box of books. She was looking for something. And not just a brooch. "I think she's after more than she's letting on," I said. "I think this has something to do with her husband." Douglas looked at me sharply. "Walter Marshall." I nodded. Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. I didn't elaborate. Not yet. I still wasn't sure what I was sitting on. All I knew was that a dead private investigator had unfinished business in this house, and his widow had just tried to tear through it like a raccoon with a grudge. An hour later, Glenda was escorted to a cruiser for questioning. Not in cuffs, not yet. But the neighborhood had already started watching. Curtains twitched, lawns were suddenly very busy, and as she was driven off, I could see it in her face. This wasn't over. Not for her, and definitely not for me. The house felt heavier after Glenda was gone. Not quieter, just heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I spent the next hour in the basement cataloging what she'd touched, moved, and potentially taken. She hadn't just rummaged, she'd targeted. Specific boxes, specific labels. My archival collection wasn't organized alphabetically, but it was organized intuitively, and she'd gone straight for the ones marked with a red tab, my most valuable items. She knew what she was looking for. By sundown, I was 2 books short. And not just any books. One was a first edition of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, published in 1926, the kind with the original blue dust jacket. The other, God help me, was a signed copy of The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler. I'd picked it up at a grimy little auction in Seattle 10 years ago. Together, those two were worth about $18,000, give or take nostalgia and my blood pressure. I called the sheriff's office again and gave the update. Douglas told me they were still questioning Glenda at the station and that he'd be stopping by again that evening with some follow-up. True to his word, he showed up just after 8. This time, he looked less like a bored bureaucrat and more like someone who'd stepped in something and was trying not to track it into the rest of his life. "She's denying everything," he said as I let him in. "Says you're trying to frame her. That you planted the books, faked the video, and manipulated the whole thing to discredit her. Creative. Almost admirable," I said, heading toward the kitchen. "Coffee? Please." We sat at the table and I handed him the list of missing items, complete with market value estimates and photographs. He looked them over carefully, then set the pages down and sighed. "You know what's strange," he said. "She's not acting like someone who got caught in the act. She's acting like someone defending a cause, like she thinks she's some kind of martyr. She's been building that narrative for 2 years. Everyone in this neighborhood thinks I'm some unshaven cryptid who eats bats and writes manifestos. She's just adding theft to the mythos." He chuckled. "Well, let's test the theory." He got up and walked to the door, then called over to Deputy Harris, who had been waiting in the cruiser. "Bring it in." A minute later, Harris walked in with a large Ziploc evidence bag. Inside, my missing books, both of them wrapped tightly in a floral scarf I recognized immediately. Glenda's. She'd worn it to every HOA meeting I'd ever accidentally glimpsed from my window. It smelled like lavender and cheap superiority. Douglas watched my face. "I thought you'd want the satisfaction." I just stared at the bag. "Found in her car." "Handbag. She refused to let us search it, so we filed a warrant." The judge didn't take much convincing, given the footage and the forced entry. When we opened it, well, surprise. "Not really," I said. "But thank you." Douglas paused. "There's more." I looked up. We found text messages on her phone. Messages that suggest she wasn't working alone. There's a guy, SW, sending her updates, telling her what files to look for, what labels to search. The messages are coded, but not exactly subtle. My stomach tightened. "You get a name." "Stephen Wells. Ring a bell?" I leaned back, nodding slowly. "Yeah. Vice chair of the HOA. Always quiet at the meetings. Never looked me in the eye. He's been giving her access to internal HOA databases, private records, archived property reports, some of which include documents on your house from before you bought it. Let me guess. Permits, previous owner info, insurance maps, stuff not exactly public." Douglas nodded. "Exactly. We're getting a subpoena for his digital records. We think he's the one who helped her access the old case files." My eyes narrowed. "Walter Marshall's old files?" "Yep." "So she wasn't just obsessed with me," I muttered. "She was finishing something her husband started." Douglas looked at me carefully. "What do you know about that?" I hesitated, then walked to my office and grabbed the scanned document, the one I'd received anonymously. I handed it over. "This came to me 2 nights ago. No sender, no message. But it's a case summary. Walter Marshall. It mentions my property, mentions evidence, possibly being in the basement." Douglas scanned the pages. "Where'd this come from?" "No clue." "My guess, someone in the HOA. Maybe someone fed up, or someone playing both sides." Douglas set the document down with a heavy breath. "Well, that explains why she was so desperate to get in here. She wasn't looking for a brooch. She was looking for something else. Something she thinks you don't even know is here." "Which begs the question," I said. "What the hell did Walter find in this house?" Douglas didn't have an answer. Instead, he pulled out a small recorder. "Mind if we do a formal statement? We'll be pressing charges for burglary, attempted theft, and possibly conspiracy, depending on what we find on Wells." I nodded and began giving my account, step by step, detail by detail. By the time he was done and the coffee had gone cold, I felt like I'd read the first few pages of a book I hadn't written, but one that someone desperately wanted buried. And not in fiction. I couldn't sleep that night. My house, usually a sanctuary of quiet, had turned into something else entirely. Not a crime scene exactly, but a vault with an open lock. Every sound in the pipes, every creak in the floorboards felt like a footstep I hadn't invited. At 2 in the morning, I was back in the basement, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Some leftover trace of Walter Marshall's investigation, maybe. Some physical evidence. Something Glenda was trying to reach. I moved slowly, box by box, shelf by shelf. Half of this space was filled with books, the other half with the kind of junk writers collect when we think we're collecting research. Old newspapers, maps, floor plans. One box in the far corner was different. It wasn't mine. A plain cardboard container, no label, no dust. It had been placed recently, within the last month. I would have remembered seeing it. Inside, a bundle of manila folders, neatly arranged, and one slim hardbound ledger with the initials WM embossed in fading gold on the spine. My hands actually trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a journal, it was a field log. Each page dated. Notes, sketches, timestamps. The first few entries were from 1999, descriptions of the house, my house, but not as it looked back then, as it looked before, during its previous ownership. One entry stood out, circled in red ink. Client D. Wexler, request, discreet inspection of basement structure, possible historical concealment under foundation, refuses municipal involvement, claims verbal history of sealed section after 1947 incident. A sealed section. I had no idea what the hell that meant. I started tapping the floor with the crowbar. The basement was concrete now, but underneath, this house was old enough to have secrets. And then I found it. Near the northwest corner, hidden behind an old workbench, one square of flooring sounded different. Hollow. I cleared the bench, swept the area, and found what I was looking for. A hairline crack running in a perfect rectangle. I slid the crowbar in gently, pried upward. The concrete groaned and lifted. Beneath it, a wooden hatch, locked with a rusted iron latch. Of course there was a damn hatch. I hesitated. If this were one of my books, this would be the part where the character makes a stupid decision that gets them killed by chapter 9. But this wasn't fiction. I was armed with caffeine and cynicism. I flipped the latch and lifted. Darkness, cool air, stone steps. I grabbed a second flashlight and descended. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet. Stone walls, no furniture, just a few rusted hooks in the ceiling and a pile of crumbling cloth that might once have been a tarp. And in the far corner, something metallic embedded in the wall. A safe. I crouched in front of it. The dial was intact, but the hinges looked fragile. I tapped it with the crowbar. Nothing. I tapped again, harder. This time it groaned. I stopped. Was I really about to break into a decades-old safe at 3 in the morning like a pulp fiction lunatic? Yes. Yes, I was. It took 10 minutes of careful levering before the door gave. The inside was lined with black velvet, mildewed and rotting, but it had preserved what was within. Documents, photos, a microcassette recorder. One photo made my blood run cold. It was of a man, middle-aged, gaunt, familiar. Next to him stood a younger woman. Both were standing in front of my house. The man was labeled WM. The woman had no label, but I knew that face. It was my mother. I sat down on the cold stone floor. Suddenly, the conspiracy theory didn't feel so ridiculous. Walter Marshall hadn't just investigated this house. He had investigated my family. I took everything from the safe and locked it in my fireproof drawer upstairs. I wasn't ready to look through it all yet, but it was clear now. Glenda hadn't been inventing paranoia. She'd inherited it, and someone else knew. The next morning, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject. Just one sentence. You open the safe. We need to talk. Tonight. Behind the community center, 10 p.m. Come alone. The night air behind the Maple Grove Community Center was colder than usual, dry and sharp, like it knew something I didn't. The place was empty. No yoga moms, no chess club retirees, not even the usual drunk teens pretending the parking lot was Woodstock. Just the hum of a distant HVAC unit and the faint click of my boots on asphalt. I arrived at 10 on the dot as instructed, brought nothing but my phone, a flashlight, and the kind of existential dread you can't buy in stores. It was quiet for exactly 30 seconds. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows near the back fence. Stephen Wells. I hadn't seen him up close in over a year. He was taller than I remembered, wiry, nervous in that way people get when they think being helpful might also get them killed. "You came," he said, voice dry, like it hadn't been used in a while. "You invited me," I said. "So here we are. Enlighten me." He looked around, fidgeted with his sleeves, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat, handed it to me without a word. It was a copy of a letter on HOA letterhead, dated 8 months ago, addressed to an insurance agency, written by Glenda Marshall. She was filing an intent to claim a stolen heirloom, a family brooch valued at $20,000. She detailed the supposed theft, named no suspect, but subtly hinted at a new and unstable neighbor with limited integration in the community. 8 months ago, long before her little performance started. "She planned the whole thing," I said, rereading it. Stephen nodded. "She came to me a year ago, said she needed help accessing certain records, old property files, municipal permit archives, that sort of thing. Claimed she was trying to protect the neighborhood from legacy loopholes." "You mean me?" He didn't deny it. "She said your property threatened the HOA's architectural sovereignty." He actually used that phrase. I almost laughed. Almost. "But that's not what this is about anymore, is it?" I said. "It's about her husband's case, the one he never closed." Stephen swallowed. "She found some of his old notes after he died. Became convinced that something dangerous, incriminating, was hidden on your property. She never told me what exactly, just that if she could find it, she could destroy any trace of whatever it was." I pulled out my phone and opened a photo of the documents I'd found in the basement safe. Held it up. "You mean these?" His eyes widened. "Where did you—" "In a sealed room under my basement, hidden since the late 40s. Walter Marshall knew something. Something tied to my mother." Stephen looked like he was about to throw up. "Glenda, she was obsessed. Started saying your family covered up a crime, that your mother had been involved. But there's nothing on record, nothing solid, just hearsay and paranoid speculation." "Doesn't matter," I said. "She believed it, and she tried to frame me for theft to justify digging through my home without a warrant." He shook his head. "She didn't care if the brooch was really stolen. It was insured. Filing the claim was step 1. Planting it on you, or in your house, was step 2. The real goal was destroying Marshall's original file before it reached someone else." "Too late for that," I said. Stephen looked relieved. "Good. Then maybe I can sleep again." "Why are you helping me now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because she's already trying to flip it on me. Says I acted alone, that I accessed records without her knowledge. She's throwing me under the bus, and I've got nothing left to lose." "Do you have more?" I asked. "Emails, messages?" He nodded. "Everything. I archived it all. I was afraid. But now—" He reached into his coat again and handed me a flash drive. On that drive are transcripts of every message, voice note, and email she sent me, plus the HOA logs I accessed on her behalf. Enough to bury her? Enough to cremate her. Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked into the shadows, melting back into the quiet night like a guilty conscience. I drove straight to the sheriff's station. Douglas was still there, working late like always. When I told him what I had, he didn't even bother with small talk. Took the flash drive, loaded it up, and spent the next hour skimming through it with a look on his face like he was chewing drywall. "Well," he said at last, "looks like we've got enough to add conspiracy, insurance fraud, falsification of records, and unlawful data access. And the brooch. She reported it stolen 6 weeks before she planted it. Claimed she'd noticed it missing during a charity sale that no neighbor remembers happening. That's premeditated fraud, and a very stupid lie. She's going to jail," I said. "She's going to court first. But yeah, it's looking like felony territory." I left the station that night feeling lighter, not victorious, not yet, but like someone had handed me the final chapter to a mystery I didn't even know I was part of. The ghosts in my basement finally had names, and Glenda Marshall was about to answer to every single one of them. They say justice moves slow. They're right, but when it moves, it crushes. 3 months passed before the court date. During that time, Glenda Marshall's fortress of suburban dominance crumbled in real time. The HOA removed her as president 2 weeks after the sheriff's department issued a formal statement of investigation. The board tried to save face, claiming internal irregularities and failure to meet ethical standards. Translation: we backed the wrong tyrant, and now we're trying not to drown with her. Her house went up for sale shortly after. Word around the neighborhood was that she needed the money for her legal defense. No one said it out loud, but I could feel the collective sigh of relief. Lawn ornaments started reappearing. Front porches had people on them again. Even Carl started jogging past my house again, this time with a nod. But the real satisfaction came in court. The courtroom was sterile, fluorescent, the color of old printer paper. Glenda sat at the defendant's table in a stiff gray suit, her usual smugness cracked and brittle. Gone was the pastel cardigan queen of Maple Grove. In her place was someone very aware that the world no longer revolved around her rules. I took the stand and told my story, calmly, clearly. I presented the video of her picking the lock, the inventory of my missing books, the footage showing her emerging from the basement. And finally, I handed over the documents from the hidden safe, though most of that material was sealed under court order until it could be authenticated and reviewed separately. Then came the real fireworks. The prosecution introduced Stephen Wells as a cooperating witness. His testimony was devastating. He described the entire scheme, how Glenda orchestrated the insurance fraud, how she tried to plant the brooch, how she accessed confidential HOA documents under false pretenses, and, most damning of all, how she attempted to erase her late husband's final investigation to protect a lie. The judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes like cold glass, didn't hide her disdain. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. Burglary with intent to commit theft, criminal conspiracy, insurance fraud, falsification of documents, defamation, and filing of false police report. The sentence: 3 years in state prison, 2 suspended under probation, 1 year mandatory, plus a $25,000 fine and restitution of $15,000 to me. I didn't smile, not in the courtroom, but when I got home that night, I opened a bottle of scotch I'd been saving since the day I moved in. I sat by the fireplace with a copy of The Long Goodbye in one hand, the copy, and raised my glass to the ceiling. She'd underestimated me. All of them had. The funny part, I never found out what exactly was in those sealed documents about my mother. Not all of it. Some pages were too faded to read. Others were cryptic, PI shorthand, old case references, partial transcripts. Nothing incriminating. Just strange. But one detail stood out. A note in Walter Marshall's handwriting scrawled in the margin of one report. Not her fault. She tried to stop it. B. Who or what B was, I still don't know. Maybe that's a story for another time. What I do know is this. I turned that whole experience into a novel. My editor went feral for it. It hit the bestseller list within weeks of publication. Title: The Brooch Trap. In the dedication, I wrote, to GM, thanks for the plot. Hope the lighting in your cell is good enough for reading. Sometimes reality does your writing for you.